Our speaker for the day worked with evangelistic faith missions in Bolivia for about 2 years. She returned to Colorado Springs and later married her husband John in 2006. They served at evangelistical Wesleyan missionaries, pastoring a church on First Nation community in Blood Vein, Manitoba. After her husband's unexpected death in 2011, she returned to Colorado Springs, where she currently lives. It is my pleasure to present to you Miss Glenda Weiss.
I'm going to that. Well, thank you all. I don't usually use my oxygen unless I have to, but I didn't want to sound like Johnny Cash when he sings. So I didn't want you to have to listen to somebody that sounded like they were going to run out of air every few seconds. So we're going to do our best. I want to thank you all for inviting me to share with you. I was surprised when Sister Melissa called me to thank me and to talk to me about speaking for the Women of Worth meeting, and I knew who I had been recommended by, and I knew that it might happen, but I wasn't expecting it. It's been a long time since I've done this. As a missionary and a missionary spouse, I did my share of speaking, but haven't done that lately. I want to start off with some scriptures, and they may seem kind of disconnected, but I hope they'll make sense as we go. The first one is in 2 Corinthians 12:9. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And then out of Psalms 42, verse 8, Yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime and in the night. His song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. And last out of Acts. And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them. I know those seem disconnected, but I hope it will all come together. Now, I was told I had way more time than I thought I had, and I was worried about boring you to death, so everybody's telling me I need to make it longer. So if it's too long, you're free to leave. I'm not going to be offended. I was born here in Colorado Springs and grew up attending church. Most of you probably, a lot of you, knew me before I remember meeting you because, you've known me that long. Some of you are brand new. I've never met you before today. Some of you have heard of me. Some of you have heard me speak before. The ones of you that have heard of me, I don't know if I want to know what you've heard, but we'll leave it there. So I was saved when I was about 6 years old and was sanctified during my years in Bible college. And I was told I needed to add in more things here, so be patient with me because this isn't in my notes. But when I was 17, we lost my brother unexpectedly. He was 15, we lost him. We were homeschooling at the time, and he'd gone to watch the local construction workers on this bridge over here, just off of Hancock, just up the road. We live on up the hill ways, and he was taking a break from school and rode his bike down there, and his heart stopped while he was there. It was nothing they did. They realized something was wrong, and they tried to do CPR. They tried to help, and we got a call from the hospital to come. So that was pretty traumatic. My introduction to grief in a very personal way. But you know what? We made our way through it. It's been a long time. That was 1995. It's been a very long time ago. But God has his ways. And slowly and stumblingly, we found our way through. But we found our way through because we knew he was ready to go to heaven. We knew that he was already there. And God, in his wisdom and for his reasons, allowed it to happen. Wasn't long, I was off to college and into Bible college. I really got established and sanctified while I was in college, really filled with the Spirit. And after graduation, I went off to South America as a missionary. I'm sure that was pretty tough for my poor parents. They'd already lost one child, and the other kid's gone off to who knows where. And I was living in La Paz, South America, in Bolivia. We're living at 12,000 feet or so. And almost 14,000 feet every weekend there in the Andes Mountains. And about 2 years into that, I got really sick from a bacteria that, you just catch those every now and again, those GI bugs. And I got really sick. I got really dehydrated. And I ended up with blood clots. And I ended up in the clinic down there for a week. That was interesting. Don't do that. Just gonna say, don't do that. It was a very good clinic. It was run by the German people. It was a very nice clinic, but it's not somewhere you want to be. Eventually we realized that, yes, I needed to come home. My doctor wasn't thrilled at the idea of me staying there when I was from the US. I flew home, dummy me. In between my time in the clinic there and before I left, I threw a clot that went from my leg to my lungs. Now, if you know anything about that, that is bad. Fortunately, it only went to one lung and didn't go to both, or I wouldn't be here today. But it went to one lung, and I finally made it home, and my flight was delayed, and it was all sorts of excitement. I didn't get home till a day late. But my parents were very, very relieved to have me back in their care. And then I ended up in the hospital here for 3 weeks in 2002. They weren't sure what to do with me at that point, but once again, in His wisdom and His knowledge, I'm here today because of God. About 6 months after that, I thought I'd gotten rid of oxygen forever, and God had miraculously healed me, and I was going to go to nursing school. I had a missions call. I was going to go to nursing school. I was going to be a missionary nurse. I wanted to become a midwife, and I wanted, specifically at that time, I really thought that was my plan. I was going to end up working in Honduras at the clinic that Evangelistic Faith Missions has there. I was in nursing school, and before that finished, I hadn't felt specifically, that was just what I thought I was supposed to be doing, and it just never really worked out to find a school for midwifery or an emphasis in that. I was at UCCS in the nursing program. While I was in school doing that program, I randomly got a letter from one of my fellow classmates in Bible college, John Weiss, and I was like, that's odd, especially when it came on Halloween. That kind of was like, huh? But we corresponded and called, and he ended up moving out here, and we were making plans to get married in a year or two, and suddenly one day my dad had surgery and he was home recovering, and I got a frantic call at school that the police were looking for me. I torn home, I dashed home, there was ambulances and fire trucks everywhere, and I had a panicked call from Mom and my phone, and she'd come home from work and found him on the floor, and he was gone. And we realize now that there probably is a genetic blood clotting thing in our family, but I was the first, we didn't realize it. And his clot didn't go to just one lung, it went to both. So we somehow, once again, stumbled through, and we survived that. That was in September, am I right? Or is it October? August. That's right, it was August of 2006. And so we were struggling, and my husband's like, well, why don't we go ahead and get married, and then we can stay in the basement. Your mom won't have to worry about moving or what to do, and we'll just do that. So we had a small wedding and got married, and that's what we did. And meanwhile, that had thrown everything into chaos again. I took a semester off from school and just took some time to try to grieve and figure out what was happening in my life. We knew God was in control, and once again, you find a way through. And the way we found a way through those times was to find one thing that we could be thankful for. Didn't have to be a big thing. It just had to be one thing. And when you're in the midst of chaos and it feels like the whole world has collapsed in on you, if you can find one thing to be thankful for, you will find a way through. So as time went on, I finished my nursing degree, and we kind of sort of figured out, and we were feeling like we should be doing something more for the Lord, and we were praying about it, and the door opened for us to go to talk to the Evangelical Wesleyans about possibly going to Blood Vein to work with the First Nation there. Now, a First Nation is much like one of our Indian reserves here. It's the people we worked with. Now, they use different names up there, but here they would be the same as the Ojibwe and Cree peoples. So we made our plans and went to visit. And we had to fly in because when we went to visit this place, it was in April. Now, in April, to go to Blood Vein at that time, you had to cross Lake Winnipeg. Now, if you're not familiar, you know, a lake's a lake. Lake Winnipeg's 264 miles long. And at its widest point, it's 68 miles wide. Part of it, though, its average depth is like 50 feet. But there's places where it's much deeper, and it can get extremely, with that shallow water, it can get extremely rough. Well, in the spring and the fall, it freezes or thaws, depending on which way it is. So we had to fly in because there was too much ice for the boats and not enough ice to drive across. So we went to visit. We had quite an adventure. Came back and we're like, well, we feel like this is where God wants us. So we prepared, and we had more than our share of adventures, as I'm sure Sister Bonnie among some of the rest of you remember. We had flat tires, we had a tire come off of we had the axle come out of our trailer, you know, just adventures. We finally made it. We got up there and we were waiting to cross on the ferry. It's about a 12-mile ferry ride. Takes about 2 hours. And you might as well just plan on doing something because you're on the ferry and that's where you are and that's it. And one time the water was rough in the center. There's a channel that flows through the lake, flows up north. And the water was really rough in the channel. And so the captain wasn't sure if he could make it over, so he stopped at an island. And the name of the island was Black Bear. And so I was telling Mom later about it, and I said, yeah, we tied up on Black Bear for a while to see what she thought we had tied up a black bear. We didn't. We just visited an island. But that's how all of your supplies came in and out of the community. There was a couple of little stores, but you learned right away that on the day you showed up, they might have milk and they might not. They might have bread, they might not. So you learned when you went shopping, you shopped for several months at a time, and you went to Winnipeg and you stocked up. One time we knew it was coming into that time when it was going to be freezing, and we didn't know when we'd get out again. And we ended up with 100 pounds of potatoes in the cab of our truck between us. And I had 12 flats of eggs. They weren't in crates. They were flats, 2.5 dozen per flat on my lap. Because we'd gotten a really good deal from this place that was was a laying barn, and you could get the seconds really cheap. So, you know, that was really an interesting trip on the ferry. We lost one egg. One egg broke. I didn't think we did too bad. I thought that was pretty amazing. So that just gives you an idea of some of our adventures. I never knew what was going to happen up there. I had left my mop outside one day to dry off. Hadn't been there long. You know, set it outside my door so it would dry. And I looked out my window later, and some kids had come by, and they had my mop, and they had it down at the dock, and they were dipping it in the dirty, muddy creek, and then they were mopping the sidewalk between the house and the church. I was very glad I had a new mop head, and I made a note to not put my mop outside to dry. But, you know, those are the things that happen, just the fun things of life. Sometimes we would go up past the dump to see if the bears had come down or see if the eagles were there. So we saw a lot of eagles while we were there. Then the winter of 2011 arrived, and we'd heard that the winter road down the east side of Lake Winnipeg was open. It would open before the road that crossed the lake would. The river froze before the lake froze. So it was December 2011. We loaded up our stuff. The tribe had talked to us, the tribal council, about maybe our church could do a special Sunday school party for the children for Christmas. So I had a big long list of all the baking I was going to do for this big party and all the adventures we were going to have at this party, and as well as some other things we were going to get for Christmas week and take care of our church people. We headed off to town in the truck. It was cold and late when it was dark. We were on our way back home, and we hit a slick spot in the snow-covered roads. We rolled the truck. We spun and then we rolled. I was able to get out and was trying to see if I could help John, and I couldn't. And I realized that in that time frame he had gone on to heaven and I had not. So once again, we're standing here lost. No idea where I was, no idea which direction home was. I'd gotten out. In the process of getting out, I'd had to take my coat off. I lost my keys, got my coat back on, crawled back in the truck to see if I could do anything, and I couldn't. And we had talked about what to do if we ever got stranded in winter. We knew we'd need a fire. We always carried fire starting materials in the truck. So my survival instincts kicked in. I had a plan. If I hadn't already known what to do, I would have been completely lost, but we had discussed it. I managed to was searching around and my boots had been in the back of the truck because they were big snow boots and bulky. I didn't need those in town. And I found one of my boots, and I was so glad that I got it put on, and I said, "Thank you, Lord," because I was so thankful I'd found my boot. And that fast, the enemy of our soul sat on my shoulder and said, "You stupid idiot. You're here in the middle of nowhere. Your husband's dead. God could have stopped this, and he didn't. He doesn't care about you. Why are you here?" And it just stopped me dead in my tracks. I didn't even move. Because I knew this was a crisis moment. And I said, "No, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to choose to be thankful." Then I eventually found my other boot, got a fire started, and another family showed up and on their way into Blood Vein, and they stopped, of course, and took me into town, and we reported it to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and then they took me over to the clinic because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't have keys to even get in my house. And once again, here I was, lost, for a better word, just alone. I had phone calls to make that I don't ever want to make again. I had to call my mom, I had to call his parents, call our missions director. I called brother and sister Kinnaman, Jim and Tina Kinnaman. We were good friends with them. They lived on the other side of the lake in Blood Vein, Manitoba, and we were in Blood Vein. They were in Riverton. And bless their hearts, they came. I don't know where they got the money. I don't know if anybody reimbursed them. I didn't. I don't know how they did it. They got her down almost to Winnipeg. She got on a plane and she was over there the next day to stay with me. And I don't know if I was even sensible while she was there. I just was in survival mode. I was working the problems. All the things that come up when someone unexpectedly passes away, all the people that need notified and all the paperwork you need to do. And I just was working the problems, but I was so thankful she was there. Mom was able to get a passport within a single day. that was a miracle in and of itself. An emergency passport, those don't happen just overnight usually. Bless their hearts, Steve and Judy, Julie, Aunt Judy, Steph, they worked like Trojans. They got Mom up to Denver, and the lady up there was compassionate in the consulate's office, and she's like, well, if you can come back today, I'll have it for you. So they went and got some stuff, and Mom got her passport that day. She was also able that same day to get some extra warm clothes, because I didn't know how she was going to get over to my community. I didn't have a truck. Our other vehicle was on the other side of the lake. I didn't even know if it would run. It had been sitting there all winter. I was stuck. I had a snowmobile. I thought for a while they were going to have to bring her across the lake on a sled. We didn't know if the other road was back open yet, behind a snowmobile. Thankfully, that didn't happen. The Lord intervened and worked it out. Bless their hearts, one of the local men that ran one of the stores, he and his family were going to be in town. He's like, I'm going to be in Winnipeg to pick up supplies for the store and the auto business. He's like, we'll get her and we'll bring her home. And he and his wife picked Mom up at the airport and brought her to the community, up to Bloodvein where I was. Sister Kinnaman had left that day because she knew Mom was coming. It was almost Christmas. Some people, friends up there from the clinic, they invited us up for Christmas dinner, and they were just sweet and kind. And I don't remember much about it. I just remember appreciating the fact that they helped us and were there for us. It was just so many times, so many miracles. They might seem small, but they meant the world to me. The love, the care, the compassion. So I knew that Bloodvein wasn't a place where I could continue working alone. Primarily the people that came to church were mostly the men. Very few women came, and children. And I didn't feel like that was what I should do. So we were praying about it, and I didn't know, I was very concerned about trying to leave the community with John's ashes, with him having died out of the country. It was a bit complicated, and I was struggling to figure out that paperwork. But we did get it figured out. It was a couple of months later before we moved. We left to move, and God once again provided a way. He sent me movers. Now, he didn't send me the Christian people from the church to move me. Oh no. He sent my husband's friends from Colorado Springs. One of them runs a garage, and I refuse to tell you the name of his garage because the name of his garage has profanity in it. God used him to move me back. He and another friend of ours, I've known a long time, he has nothing to do with church, wants nothing to do with church. They got a truck and a trailer. They borrowed a trailer from another pastor friend, and I think he thought he'd just loaned his trailer to a bunch of people on drugs. I don't think either one of them used drugs, but they certainly were not what you would expect God to send you in that moment. And he uses anyone, and he uses everyone. And they came and they moved me home. And I will be forever grateful to those two guys for all their work and their love and their compassion during that time. They were very careful, they were very compassionate. We switched around drivers sometimes between the vehicles, and it was just, I couldn't have done it without them. And you know, we sometimes put God in a box, and we think God's only going to do things our way, and he doesn't. He takes the lid off, and he blows the top off, and he destroys the sides, and things work. And we just are like, God, I don't understand, but I'm so thankful. And this next part, I kind of jumped around here a little, I'm sorry. Didn't get this all in chronological order. But one of those days when I was there, before we left to come home, I was struggling. I'd gotten up, I'd taken a shower. Grief is exhausting. And I was just completely worn out. I had no energy left. And the words came into my mind, when my strength has failed, ere the day is half done. And a lot of you will recognize that as coming from a song. And that ties in with our songs and our thankfulness. But he gave me the grace. He gave me the strength when I didn't have it. My day wasn't even half done. It hadn't even started yet. But he gave me the strength. And he gave me the grace. And I've leaned on that strength and I've leaned on that grace almost every day of my life since then. One of those times when I needed that extra grace, the local children, they kept knocking on my door. When are we going to have Sunday school, Sister Glenda? When are we going to have Sunday school? I didn't have energy. I didn't have time. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know which way was up. Finally, I said, well, we'll have it on Sunday. I'll ring the bell. So it was about the second Sunday after John had passed away. I rang the bell. The Sunday school children showed up. And I'd spent a lot of time praying about what to teach them, making sure I had a craft, how I was going to do it. And I gathered them in, and we kind of all sat together in the front of the church, and we talked about heaven. We talked about how important it is to go to heaven and to be ready to go to heaven, and how Brother John was in heaven, and all of that. And we did our little craft, and as the children were leaving, more people came in. I had about 6 or 8 adults that some of them had never even come to church before. And I wasn't planning on a service. I wasn't planning to preach to people. And I looked at Mom and I said, what am I going to do? I said, pray. I can't send these people home. They came to be fed. So I prayed and we had a little service, and I don't even know what all I said. I just remember that the Lord directed me to the scripture where Jesus was talking to his disciples right before the ascension. That was the only thing that's literally all I remember about that service, other than my total despair and my unpreparedness. And during that time, I went back a few times to my hymnal to hunt up He Giveth More Grace. It was written by Annie Johnson Flint. If you ever want to read an interesting hymn story, the story of her life is fascinating. But here's the words to the song. He giveth more grace as our burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength as our labors increase. To added afflictions, he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials, he multiplies peace. When we have exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving is only begun. And that day with the children, I had hoarded all of my resources for them, but he gave more. And then there's another verse that's not in many of our hymns books, but when I was looking up the words to the song, it spoke to my heart even today. Fear not that thy need shall exceed his provision. Our God ever yearns his resources to share. Lean hard on the arm everlasting, availing. The Father both thee and thy load will upbear. So if we're feeling overburdened, he not only lifts us up, but he lifts our burdens up as well. And then, of course, what we sing is the chorus. His love has no limits. His grace has no measure. His power, no boundary known unto man. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he gives and he gives and he gives again. And when I was doing this, I really wanted to end this here. But I didn't feel like I could. I didn't feel like the Lord wanted me to. I felt like he wanted me to go ahead and share some of the things that have happened since I've been back home. They're not great missionary stories. It's not. I got back here. I took a couple of years just to even find myself. Bless her heart. I was staying with Mom, and I helped her some with some of her jobs and cleaning jobs and just things here and there. We did some house projects. About 2 years later, I was finally ready to go back to work, and the Lord opened a door for me to do home care for medically fragile children. As a nurse, I was going in, and sometimes I'd have one patient, maybe two patients, little children with feeding tubes, IVs, seizures, some of those things. I was one-on-one with them. The most, I think I had 2. And wasn't very long after I'd started this job, I found out I had cirrhosis of the liver from an autoimmune liver disease that, being the good nurse that I was, I had ignored all the early signs of and attributed them to everything else. Grief, stress, that covers a lot. And that was not what I was expecting that day. And around the same time, I found out, those blood clots I talked about that God had healed me from, they hadn't gone anywhere. And I felt really, really betrayed. I felt like, God, I gave you glory for that. I wrote articles about your miraculous healing. Why? And I really struggled for a while. Back using this, we found out, no, over time I've developed pulmonary hypertension from the old clots, and my body's done a lot of adapting. But by now it's getting a little tired of trying to take care of a liver that doesn't work very well and a lung that pretty much doesn't have any blood flow. So I struggled along and ended up almost on the liver transplant list. I had the whole workup, was on the list briefly. Then they got my lung scans and they freaked out and they said, we can't do a transplant on somebody like that. And then God in his wisdom gave wisdom to these wonderful doctors I have now. He gave them all kinds of wisdom. And now I have a quality of life I didn't have 5 or 6 years ago. Some of you remember I went around, I was pretty yellow and I was pretty much of a mess. And I'm a lot better today, and I'm very thankful for that. Do I understand all that stuff? No, I don't. Every once in a while I get this bright idea, I'm going to sign up for a short-term missions, or really would like to do a really big project, I probably shouldn't. About a day or so later, I find out, no, that's why you're on disability. That's why you shouldn't be doing that. You're not going to have energy today, and I pretty much don't do anything, and Mom graciously puts up with me just crashing. She's kind of used to it. I'm getting better about not totally smashing, but I kind of tended to go like this. Some days are like this, and some days are like that. And I've learned to adjust to it. Do I have a ministry? Yes. Is it the one I wanted? No. Do I see a lot of people saved? No. Do I interact with a lot of people? Yes, I do. I'm in a lot of different online Facebook groups and other groups for my various liver issues, my lung issues, trying to help people. And there's a lot of people that, my doctor's report says X, Y, Z, and I don't understand it. And I try to help because I feel like that's my job. I'm a nurse. That's what I do. I'm a patient advocate. But I have to be very careful because I no longer have a license, but I do understand the terminology. And it's amazing what doors the Lord opens sometimes. Somebody wants to hear more, or somebody shares, and I'm able to share with them in return. And you just don't know when you see somebody walking down the street what's really happening inside. But I wanted to share this before we end this part. Finding contentment can be a challenge in our lives. It's kind of like humility. About the time you think you have it, you've lost it. For me, about the time I think I've figured out what it means to, whatsoever state I am therewith to be content, like the Apostle Paul says, I find out I'm not. And I'm taken back to the verse where he says, I die daily. And we die daily to our wishes, to our wants. And we have to surrender, once again, not my will, but your will. Lord, your will be done. And we don't arrive just because we've made one right decision. Just because I made a choice to be thankful for my boot, does that mean I haven't had other chances and needs to be thankful? No, there's other times when it's been even harder to say I was thankful. The devil doesn't give up on us. Well, it's because we defeat him once. And he likes to come around with a different tactic, and then a different tactic than that. And he especially likes to say, but did God really say that? Or are you sure about that? Yeah. And then we're back to our scripture, and we're back to hiding in his word. I don't have answers, but I do know that when we talk about running a race on earth, you know, you look around and you see people, and you think, man, they're such a great Christian. They're really running this race. They're running it like they have, you know, they're running like a beautiful gazelle. And then there's people like me, and I feel like I'm running like a turtle with a limp or something, you know. I'm just kind of plump, plump. Well, maybe I'll get there eventually. But we all are running a race. And it doesn't matter how we run, but we will win if we stay under the blood of Jesus. And if we keep our trust in him, and if we stay in his presence, you know, we find peace. We might not find it that precise second, but there is peace in his presence. There's hope in his presence. And if we stay there, we'll be okay. It's his blood that saves us, his blood that sanctifies us, and it's his blood that will bring us through to heaven. And the only thing I really want you to remember today is that if God could do this for me, he can do that, and he can do way, way, way more than that for you. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what loss you've had in your life. I don't know what diagnosis you're dealing with. I don't know what catastrophe has happened. I have no idea, but God knows. And just as he was with me beside the side of the road when I didn't know what to do, he's beside you. And if you hold on tight, he will show you the way through. Sometimes you just keep doing what you know, and you just do it one step at a time. Sometimes it's just sometimes it's not even a whole day at a time. Sometimes it's just a minute by minute, step by step. But he is there. He will walk with you, and he will be with you. I want to go ahead and close this part with prayer, and then maybe we can kind of have some questions, discussion, whatever. Lord, as we finish this little part of our day, I ask, Lord, that you would bless this. I ask, Lord, that you would speak to each one of our hearts to remember that in your presence we have peace. In your presence we have what we need. You are our supply. Your grace is sufficient. It's more than sufficient. It's abundant. We want to thank you for that, Lord. And as we go into the next part, Lord, I just ask that you would give us each wisdom, that you would give us knowledge, Lord, of you, and that you would have your way, and that we would lift each other up, Lord, and that we would all leave encouraged through your strength and through your grace. In your name we pray. Amen. Now, I'm more than willing to try to answer questions, discussion. If you have questions about where I've lived, I'm happy to try to answer them. If you have spiritual questions, we can pray about them together. We can talk about them, whatever. So I'm going to come and I'm going to pull a chair around. I'm just going to have a sit here.
I found the newspaper article about the accident. Now, it was very short, had not a lot of details. But how long were you alone?
I don't know.
Because it said, I think 2 hours or so.
We
or over until someone came.
We tried to look at, the question was how long was I by the road? We tried to look at our receipt because we'd gotten gas. And I don't remember I don't know if at that moment if I read it correctly or not, but we figured it was a minimum of 2 hours because I obviously had time to find my boots, start the fire, and I don't know. I just know God's peace and his presence was there in a way that I never expected. It was a holy hush. It was quiet. I wasn't worried about wild animals coming around because there are wolves in those woods. There are coyotes. There is everything in those woods. But I just know that his presence was there.
Do you know what the temperature was out there?
I'm not, the question was what was the temperature? I'm not sure exactly what the temperature was, It was cold. It had warmed up some that day and refrozen, which was why we slid. But there was definitely a good bit of snow on the ground, and it felt pretty cold. I was thankful that there wasn't a high wind.
That happened just before Christmas. What did you do about the Christmas activities for the children?
What did I do about the Christmas activities for the children? I didn't. I think, I can't remember because we still had the candy and stuff. Most of the stuff I was planning to make. So I didn't get that done. But I think we did tried to give out the candy that we had, pretty much. And I did send out an apology. I think I did an apology. I can't remember if I wrote that and put it at the post office or what. Because everybody went to the post office to get your mail. There was no delivery. It was all, if you wrote to me up there, you wrote it to general delivery. It's been a while since we had general delivery here.
And they probably didn't go to the post office very often either because of
The mail came 3 days a week. Mail would come in 3 days a week, so you tried to keep track of which days mail came in. But pretty much, we didn't have a lot of people that traveled a long ways to the post office because the roads were it was quite boggy and marshy in the local area. So if you weren't right in the community, you wouldn't have gotten your mail there, you would have gotten it elsewhere. One night, though, we did hear a plane come in and it was circled and it circled and it circled, and we're like, what on earth? Well, I found out later it was a medevac flight, and the person that was supposed to turn the lights on for the airport wasn't there or wasn't available. And they came in and they kept buzzing the runway because they didn't want to hit a moose. So they had their lights on full and they just kept coming in and almost landing and taking off to make sure there was no wildlife on the runway. Which I wouldn't have wanted to hit a moose in a plane either.
Do the tenements still serve up at Riverton, or have they moved?
They have moved, and I'm not sure where they're living now. They lived there for a long time, but I'm not sure where they're living now. They had a small farm, and she gave me some fresh vegetables out of her garden a couple of times, which was really nice.
They're actually in Cabot, Arkansas.
Are they in Cabot,
Yeah, I
Arkansas?
just saw
Okay.
them, a few months ago.
I couldn't remember. I was thinking it was down there somewhere, but I couldn't remember which state.
How long did you live up there?
We were up there almost 2 years. Everywhere I go, I've been there about 2 years, and I end up back here.
Did you ever get acquainted with Ronnie and Anita Fable up there? They're from Pegasus.
We didn't. We talked about going over to Peguis, but it just never worked out when we were there. We kept saying, oh, we need to go over. Yeah, you know how that goes.
Did you have any kind of premonition that night?
Neither of us wanted to go to town that day. We really did not want to go. But we felt like we were supposed to go. We felt like we had to go because that was the best time to go to get the stuff, to have the party for the children, and we felt like we really needed to do that. And we had talked previously about that, and neither one of us knew how long. We were like, I don't know how long we're going to be here. We just didn't know. We didn't know if it was going to be 10 years or right away. So I think the Lord did try to prepare us. Should we have done something different? I don't know. I don't know, because I feel like His plan is His plan, and why it worked out that way. Everybody's like, well, why didn't you stay home if the roads were that bad? We didn't know they were that bad, for one. And for another, we felt responsible to go, and especially after we were contacted by the local tribal government, we felt really like we needed to do that. And we wanted to be sure and have enough time to prepare for our little party for the children. Something I've asked myself more than once, and I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. Life just has a way of doing things to us that we don't expect. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how you're going to react until you're in that. Mm-hmm. And the Lord isn't going to give you the grace for that particular need until you're in it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people like to say, oh, you're such a strong person. No, I'm not. It's God's strength. It's not mine. I'm not a strong person. God is. God's the one that gives you the grace. And he has it for everybody. He really does.
When you were a missionary in Bolivia, what did you do as a missionary there?
I was in language school for a good bit of the time, and we would travel. The mission I was with was pretty established, and they had multiple different churches. It had been there about 20 years or so, and they had started quite a number of little churches. So almost every Sunday, we would be traveling around and visiting different of the little churches in the different communities. And sometimes we would drive out, maybe an hour or 2 hours out onto the Altiplano, which is a high plains of Bolivia. And we would find there would be a little community with a church. And what had happened is some of the people would have come into the city for work or something, and they would have gotten saved while they were in the city working or through a friend at work. And then they would take and start a church back in their own community. And so we would spend a lot of time doing that. One of our churches was literally almost on the banks of Lake Titicaca, that big, huge freshwater lake up there that's tidal even. And so it was very, very interesting. I loved going to that little church. So beautiful. Very much, actually, like here, very dry and very similar terrain. Now, if you got down further south, which we had 1 or 2 churches down, if you went down the mountains, there was one that was about 7,000 feet, and it was more tropical. And then there was one we had that was even further down off the mountain, and it was almost down in the Amazon River basin. But it was not close to where the main part of the river was, but it would have drained into that eventually. And that was extremely tropical. That's the kind where, you have the bugs that come in and land on you that are like this big and startle you.
From tropical rainforest to Canada,
Exactly.
frozen tundra.
I've experienced a lot in my short time.
Do you think living at such a high altitude had anything to do with your lung situation?
It may have. Living at higher elevation, you do produce more red blood cells to carry more oxygen, but whether that would have been a very minor contributing factor. Primarily, I think it was the dehydration from the bacteria that triggered it, personally. It was Shigella, by the way. Don't get it. It's nasty. Another question.
Are there missionaries there in Bolivia now?
I can't remember. There was for quite some time. I don't know if there's anyone there right now. I need to double check the newsletter, and I read it, but that piece of information didn't stick. I do know they visit fairly frequently for special services. And I know that there's they were trying to set it up before I left for a lot of email and things so that it could be run by nationals.
Maybe the work is going on with people.
Yes, it's continuing on primarily with the local pastors,
Okay.
national
So they were
pastors.
setting up like a church.
Right, they were trying to get it set
training
up
pastors to carry on for them.
Right.
Yes.
And at one point in time, we even had a national pastor from, it was either Guatemala or Honduras, that went, and they lived there for a while to do some mission work, which was very helpful because at least Spanish was their first language.
Isn't it one of those places where you could be driving along and you can get sabotaged on the road?
Not so much, although I was downtown in a line for immigration visa stuff when there was a protest on the street outside and we got tear gassed. Don't do that either. If anybody stayed around, I'm sure it was the shortest line in history after that because we all left. We just went, flagged a taxi and went home because our neighborhood was very quiet. But we were in town. We just happened to be in town at the wrong time, which it was not uncommon for them to march and protest. But what was different about this protest was they decided to sit down and totally stop the traffic and not just keep moving. And so that was another one of those interesting adventures that I don't care to repeat.
What was the best part about living in Bolivia?
The best part, I love the mountains. I love looking out and seeing the mountains. Although where I lived, I always got confused because it seemed like the sun rose in the west and set in the east, and I know it didn't really, but it drove me crazy.
So
But
the
I loved it.
mountains were to the east there, unlike here.
Well, they were, that's the way it looked because the community where the part of La Paz we were in, La Paz is kind of in a bowl in the mountains. And so where you can kind of see a mountain whichever way you look. So I think it was partly where the mountains I could see from my window where they were that made me feel like it should have been to the west. But you come in and there's Iamani and Iyamco, and they're both very, very high mountains.
What about in Canada? What was the best part of living there for you?
The best part of living in Canada, I loved the location. I loved the green. I loved the wildlife. It was fun with the people, learning their culture, some of their cultural things. Where we lived, there was, now I don't know if any of you have seen it, but on that TV series they did for a while, When Calls the Heart, the little church by the water, it almost looked like that when you came across on the ferry and you would look up the little creek that we were on and you would see the church sitting there. It was just beautiful. And I enjoyed learning about their culture, their stories. I loved it. In Bolivia, the other thing I really liked was a lot of the food I didn't really like, but they did, closest thing, they did salteñas. And the closest thing I can compare them to is like a Hot Pocket with only like a beef stew or a chicken stew in it. But you did have to watch out because sometimes they would put a whole olive in there with the pit in it, so you had to be careful. But I really did, I enjoyed those. On market day, I would go down and get them from the little fellow would sell them, that sold them, came to the church, and I would always, on market day in our area, I would try to go down and get one from him. That was my special little market day treat.
How long were you married?
We were married about 6 years. Actually 5. We just had our 5th anniversary in 2011.
Did you journal?
I didn't. I'm not a good journaler. I've tried. A lot of people have wished I had journaled. For a long time I did a lot of emails, so I sort of had an email journal for a while.
What was the culture like in Canada?
The culture...
You say you love it, but how's it different?
The culture in Canada is very much of a Native American culture, a lot of traditional religion. In our community, there were 2 different groups. One group was very much for traditional religion, and if that particular family wasn't traditional religion, they were Catholic. The other group were more Protestant in their faith, and they didn't want to have much to do with the others. So you had a little bit of hassle going on back and forth, but by the end, they were all talking to me, so it didn't matter. But fishing was a lot of the culture, and also hunting. Hunting was a big part of the culture. You would go to a community meal or gathering or wake or something, and one of the ladies would always bring almost like a teriyaki meat that was moose meat. You just knew it, and it was delicious. She really knew what she was doing with that.
Everyone speaks English?
Most of them did. They had an accent. It took me a little bit to get used to some of them, but yes, they primarily spoke English. They spoke their native language some, but they did mostly speak English in Canada.
You didn't get injured in any way in that accident?
I didn't. The only thing I did was I got a little cut from trying to break branches off to start my fire. I don't understand. I don't understand. But God knows what He does. And I was a little concerned about that because at that point in time I was on blood thinner, so I didn't know if it would be, which I'm still on. Have been on ever since I had those clots. But
So if you get cut or anything.
oh, I just know to be careful. I don't live too much in fear. I just am aware of it pretty much. Better than it was for a while, that's for sure.
I'm not sure if I missed this or not, but how long was it from the time John died until your mother arrived up there?
How long was it? Do you remember, Mom? How long before you got up there? 3 days, 4 days?
3, I think.
I'm thinking it, yeah, I was thinking it was 3 days.
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, you got in Christmas Eve.
Yeah, which was amazing too.
Yeah, and I would have contacted you early in the morning on the 21st.
So up in 3
And that
days.
dark night.
Oh, one night it was really dark and it was still and it was very, very beautiful. And I told her to come out and look at the night sky because when it's that cold, it almost looked velvety. And there, you could just see the little stars sticking through. And I told her to come out and look. And hear the wolves or the coyotes, but they sounded more like wolves than coyotes to me. But there was still something hauntingly beautiful about it.
To see the northern lights there.
We did a few times. Yes. They're very special when I see them. I always love that.
I'd love to see that one day, never have.
Yeah, I love watching the northern lights. One night I got a call. Mom was up there. It was after John had passed away. Somebody called and they were extremely worried about their child, that something was going to happen to him. They wanted us to come and pray. So we bundled up and got on our snowmobile and went up to find the house. Because I wasn't sure exactly where it was and I didn't want us to try to walk that far. And we got up there and on our way home, it's like 9:30 at night and it's cold. And I'm like, man, it doesn't feel as cold as usual. I said, I need to go by the store and see where the thermometer was and see what the temperature is. And it was 10 below. And it felt nice. The wind wasn't blowing and it felt really nice and balmy at 10 below. But we'd had minus 40 wind chills, so you know about those. Well, I'm not thinking of anything more, and if nobody has any more questions, I'll let one of these ladies from Women of Worth finish us off. Thank you so much for your time and attention.